Hey, Crystal.
Hey, yes.
Hey, don't forget to give me the power to share my screen.
Gotcha. We will do that right now.
Okay. I don't have it yet.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Human Trafficking 101 webinar. We are very excited to be here with you today and with Dr. Williamson. My name is Crystal Freyer, and I am the Communication and Marketing Specialist at TARTA. I will be guiding today's webinar and facilitating our Q&A segment. We are so proud to host today's webinar in partnership with the University of Toledo's Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute. This is in part of our joint efforts to raise awareness and help put the brakes on human trafficking. But before we kick things off, we'd like to remind our audience members that if you or someone you know needs help, please call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. This is a toll-free hotline available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and can be reached at 1-888-373-7888. And you can speak with a specially trained anti-trafficking hotline advocate. Support is provided in more than 200 languages, and callers can also dial 711 to access the hotline using TTY. Or they can text BEFREE, BEFREE, without any spaces, to 233-733. You can also report a human trafficking situation to the hotline number again at 1-888-373-7888. All the communication on this hotline is strictly confidential, so we absolutely encourage you to utilize that resource if it is something that you need or someone that you know. We'll also put that resource in the chat so that you guys can access it at your own leisure. So in today's webinar, we will cover the basics of human trafficking recognition and action, and this will be presented by Dr. Celia Williamson of the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute. Dr. Williamson is a globally recognized expert in the field of human trafficking, having delivered over 200 presentations in a career dedicated to the prevention and to helping survivors thrive. And the impact of trafficking on human trafficking on vulnerable communities has been a particular focus for Dr. Williamson, who also founded the International and Social Justice Conference in Toledo. She is also the founder of the Lucas County Human Trafficking Coalition and Ohio's first anti-trafficking program. So with that being said, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Williamson to educate us further. Please go ahead and share your screen whenever you are ready.
All right, thank you, Crystal. And I'm very happy and excited to be working with TARTA. So it's a great collaboration and good example of what other organizations and agencies and businesses could do in the community as well. So thank you. I'm going to talk briefly about human trafficking. So in 2000, the US federal government passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And what that really said was that was the US's first acknowledgement that, yes, we have human trafficking victims on US soil. So human trafficking there are two components to it. Sex trafficking, people can be victims of sex trafficking, and that's the one you've likely heard the most about. And then labor trafficking. So if someone is a sex trafficking victim, that means that they have been recruited or harbored or transportation's been provided. There's been a provision made or they've been obtained by someone, and that person is a trafficker. So anybody who recruits, harbors, transports, provides, or obtains a person for a commercial sex act of any kind in which there is force, fraud, or coercion involved. So that's the difference between what you think about street level prostitution and when you think about human trafficking or sex trafficking. It has to involve some level of force, fraud, or coercion. Now, also in the law, in the federal law, anybody that is under the age of 18 years old that is involved in the commercial sex trade is automatically a victim of sex trafficking. So let me say that again, automatically a victim of sex trafficking if they're involved in any form of the commercial sex trade. We don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion if we're talking about a child under the age of 18. That is a victim of abuse. So there's no such term as child prostitute or juvenile prostitute. We call them victims of sex trafficking. And that's true for the Ohio law as well. So when we talk about labor trafficking, someone is a labor trafficker if they have recruited, harbored, transported, provided, or obtained a person for labor or work through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And it's for the purposes of involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. So anybody that's working a job and getting paid very little or not getting paid at all and is not following the wage and hour laws, and in fact, can't quit their jobs because they're under threat, they're the victim of labor trafficking. So men, women, and children can be involved as victims of sex or labor trafficking. In fact, it's the second largest criminal enterprise in the world. The first is still drugs, because people still want their drugs all over the world. And guns are the third, but human trafficking is the second because you can resell your product over and over and over again. And it's more likely that people don't understand what you're doing. They're more likely to blame the victim, and people don't always know how to prosecute it or how to identify it. So it has become a $150 billion business around the world. And, you know, Crystal, if there are any questions that come in, just feel free to interrupt me and ask them right on the spot. So the number of victims, it's really such an underground illegal market that people try to estimate it, but you'll see various estimates all over the world and no one really can tell you definitely. But the Global Slavery Index estimates that there are 40.3 million slaves in the world today, and they estimate about 403,000 of those are in the US at any given time. So human trafficking is about power. It's about someone having power and control over someone else, although not always physical control. We'll talk about that. And it involves people who are vulnerable, people who are in need of love, attention, food, clothing, shelter, those types of things. And then it involves profit, someone that is making money off of someone else. So I'm going to focus on sex trafficking, and then I'm going to talk about labor trafficking for a little bit. So who's at higher risk of sex trafficking in Toledo, in Ohio, and across the US? There are 5 different populations that are at higher risk, and those are racial ethnic minorities, LGBTQ communities, kids, women, people that live in poverty, people with developmental disabilities, and foreign-born populations. Those are people at disproportionately higher risk. And then anyone from any socioeconomic status or any ethnicity, if they've been involved with child maltreatment and child welfare, if they have been a runaway or homeless, if they've been around influential others. And influential others really means people that sell sex, buy sex, or sell other people for sex. If they kind of run in those circles, they're at high risk. People with substance use disorders, mental health issues, people that have educational difficulties, young people, and then contact with either the juvenile court system or the child welfare system puts you at high risk as well. And then being involved in any types of gang affiliation or types of violence, either as a victim of violence or as a witness to violence. So those are sort of particularly young people who are at higher risk for trafficking. So let me see. Okay. So the recruitment process, like how do they get involved? Well, there are strategies that these traffickers use. And by the way, we're talking about sex traffickers, we're talking about pimps. Pimps, sex traffickers, same people. We just changed the name because we want to convey the seriousness of the trauma that these victims face. And quite frankly, pimp has become a word that's more likely to be used in pop culture and not to be taken seriously. People get a slap on the wrist or whatever, or think they're cool if they use the word pimp. So when we say sex trafficker, though, we're meaning the same type of people. And the strategies are really manipulation, to manipulate these folks into a vulnerable situation, giving gifts and compliments, building up that person's self-esteem, saying, I'm your boyfriend, I'm your new man, or, I'm your best friend. In Ohio, a lot of girls and women are recruiters. We're not just looking for the scary, creepy guy. And in fact, nobody with the brain cell would send the scary, creepy guy to recruit people, right? Because you've all educated your kids to stay away from the scary, creepy guy. So no, this is going to be an adult woman, another 14 or 15-year-old kid, or a good looking young guy, smelling good, walking good, acting good, with a car and trying to entice somebody who's vulnerable. And then once all that is built up and you have a friend and, young people like to have a peer group to belong to, and all those things are critically important. Then I go through the seasoning period where I start breaking down your self-esteem and your self-confidence and aiming for complete kind of psychological and emotional and physical control over you, even to the point sometimes of renaming you, creating a dependence on me, whether it's a drug dependence, whether it's a love dependence or whatever. But that is my strategy if I am a trafficker. So 2 types of traffickers, sex traffickers. There's the finesse pimp, there's the guerrilla pimp. So the guerrilla pimp is somebody who, you're walking down the street and they just jump out the car and snatch you up and put you in the car or whatever. And then you're working for them the next day. You don't know anything about prostitution, never knew anything, but they snatched you up and now that's what you do. So we hear a lot about that. But that is very, very rare, very rare. And I'll tell you why. Because in this underground market, people don't respect guerrilla pimps. It takes no finesse. It takes no brain power to snatch somebody up and force them to do something. So it's not well respected. You sometimes can't hold on to your product because they're going to try to escape. They're going to try to run, or people are out looking for them. So it's just not very lucrative. It's rarely done. It happens, but it's very rare. It's more common is the finesse pimp. And that's the person who is manipulating you, like finessing you into a certain vulnerable position, and then having you go out and work and bring in a certain amount of money. They call a quota every night or on the weekends or whatever. So they're sort of taking you and getting you to participate in your own victimization along with them, because you're chaining their minds and their hearts, not their ankles and their wrists, if that makes sense. So there's some YouTube videos I put on here, and anybody, Nicole or Crystal, if you want to put my email in the chat or your email or whatever, I'd be happy to send anybody who's on here this PowerPoint presentation, and you can get this YouTube video. It really goes in depth about a finesse pimp and the way they think, and then a guerrilla pimp and the way they think and act. And you'll get a really good idea about the difference between the two and about the whole game. Like they call it the game. You'll get very familiar with it because these are the pimps describing the game to you themselves. So I'm going to stop for a minute. Crystal, I keep calling, sometimes I think of you as Nicole, your sister, but so are there any questions so far?
Yeah, so we did have a question come in through the chat, and I will be putting in your email address here shortly as well. Okay. But from Mike from NBC 24 wants to ask a question. With the Ghislaine Maxwell verdict and with Ohio Attorney Yost actively pursuing sex trafficking more, do you think that more people know more, and do you think we are dealing with this problem better?
I think we are. Ohio is in a unique position in that you would be surprised, because we're the Midwest and we have moderately sized cities and not large cities. But we are really so far ahead of the game. We are so knowledgeable in Ohio that other states sort of consult with us. And we just are the type of people, I believe, in Ohio that we're not going to keep our family secret. We're going to tell it, because every single one of our children are valuable to us, no matter what their lot in life is. And we reach out and we call in tips, and we tend to take care of even other people's children a little better. And so we, in Ohio, we have over 20 anti-trafficking coalitions across the state. We all talk to each other. Then we also have the Human Trafficking Initiative through the Ohio Attorney General and the Ohio Governor's Human Trafficking Task Force. So in Ohio, we have great vertical communication. We also talk regularly to Senators Portman and Brown. So we have great vertical communication, and we have excellent horizontal communication in that all the coalitions talk to each other. So we do have a lot of awareness in Ohio. We need to do more, but if we looked across the state, we're doing really well in terms of educating people and having people call in tips. So yeah.
Thank you, Celia, for that. And I do see that a few questions are coming in through the chat. If you could utilize the Q&A function, that would be super helpful. But another question that was submitted was if we could talk a little bit more about the myth about human trafficking, specifically in Toledo.
Yes, so let's talk about that. We're going to get to that because there are a lot of myths about Toledo and about human trafficking in general that we're going to dispel today, because we want you to be helpful to us and not walk away with the wrong information. So I'll go a little bit further and then I'll stop for questions again. But where are the victims of trafficking sold? They're sold on the street level prostitution we see, but that's not where you're going to find like 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds typically. what you see on the streets of Toledo and Cleveland and Columbus is typically what we get back. So after someone has been recruited as a teenager, vulnerable, innocent, and trafficked, beaten, brutalized, sold, raped, they tend to pick up drugs, heroin habit, crack addiction, and to cope with their trauma, because there is a series of violence and trauma that happens in their lives and they can't get to a therapist. And so they use drugs to numb out and they become addicted to drugs. And by that time, the trafficker, no matter what they do, this person keeps giving their money to the dope dealer. And what we get back on the streets of Toledo then after that trafficker lets them go is the drug addicted woman who might be in their late 20s, their late 30s, or late 40s. And so that's what you see on the streets. But you'll see victims in strip clubs and doing private dancing, massage parlors, online, of course, working in private homes, hotels, cat houses, which are houses set up around the community for a weekend, and these houses change places. You see it at conventions, major sporting events. You see where supply, the victims, are going to be taken to demand the customers. It's an underground business. It's just like any other business. So there are the traffickers, and then there are the bottoms. And the bottoms are like the assistant manager to the trafficker. They know almost all they need to know about the game. They don't know all of it because the game is sold, never told, but they know what they need to know. Then there are recruiters that are out in communities recruiting people into this industry. There are connectors. Connectors are sort of like loosely connected to this industry, but they're people in these neighborhoods that say, hey, I can hook you up if you're a runaway, if you're homeless, if you need things. There are groomers that help you get the clothes and do the job effectively and efficiently. There are watchers in the strip clubs. So it is a business that is all making money off the backs of vulnerable young people and vulnerable adults. And then the demand part of it, we tend to think of the victims and we tend to think of the traffickers, but the demand, the customers stay fairly invisible, but the customers are people that have to have enough disposable income to be able to afford somebody who's 14 or 15 or even 19 and 20 years old. That's going to be expensive. So the people, we've done research around this, and basically almost every profession we've asked about has been a customer in this game. So it's not the creepy guy living under the bridge, basically, that is purchasing these victims. It's people that you see working in various industries. So human trafficking robs young people of the feeling of safety, right? Because the people who have been their customers are the people that look like you. Again, it's not the pervert under the bridge. The people that are wearing suits, the people that show up in the courtroom, the people that they see in church, the people, so their sense of safety is skewed. Their sense of trust. How do you trust again? And ultimately their sense of freedom. And we know a little bit about that, having gone through the pandemic. We know about restricted freedom more than we've ever known as Americans. So imagine having such restricted freedom that you have to ask basically to do almost everything. So 77% of our youth that are being trafficked right now, if we miss them, 77% of them will go into street prostitution, where they will suffer drug addiction, HIV risk, poor mental health, namely post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and they will experience frequent and heinous and pervasive violence. So that is why we're on this call today. It is critically important that we identify anybody that we even suspect might be involved in any level of the commercial sex trade, prostitution, all of those things. We've got to stop saying, this little girl's fast, she's fast. Stop it. It is the adults that are responsible for this crime. We can no longer shame and blame young people that are under 18. We need to help them. And even when they have such a hard crust and such survival skills, we need to understand that beyond that, there is a child. And maybe that young person has had to come up in a rough situation, and maybe they're presenting to you their badass selves. But behind that is a scared child who no longer trusts, who doesn't feel safe, and who might have lost their freedom. So we have to talk about the myths and the half-truths, because they're really problematic to us being able to help these young people and vulnerable adults. So the first problem, the first kind of half-truth, is that people are snatched and abducted into human trafficking. Now, the majority, over 90+% of young people that are trafficked are not snatched and they aren't abducted. I see this every week on Facebook and Instagram, like, oh my God, be careful coming out of Kroger because there's a white van driving around, it's gonna snatch you into. No, it's more likely that it's someone your young person kind of knows and is befriending them and is slowly manipulating them into the situation. That's what's happening. And so while we're over here looking for this mysterious white van and somebody getting snatched, they're over here being very successful. And so that's why we need you to look in the right, be looking for the right things. So more likely to be manipulated instead of abducted, to be befriended by somebody who feels a need that they have and sort of normalizes sex work for them over time. So the misinformation is like the hype, like I heard zip ties are being tied to your bumper so that when you go to untie them, they snatch you into trafficking, and somebody lays out on the road or has a baby carrier out on the road. And when you stop to find out what's happening, they snatch you into, it's ridiculous. Because I'm not saying that would never happen. I'm sure we can find a case or two. It's rare, but it probably exists. But overwhelmingly, sex trafficking is pimping, and pimping is sex trafficking. That means that if I'm a pimp, I'm trying to make the most money I could possibly make. And I got to do that by lowering risk, right? So if I get somebody who's vulnerable, somebody who's been through juvenile court, child welfare, runs away from home, that's a very vulnerable young person. If I can get them and convince them that I love them and they love me and they got to go out and do this for us, then I can get them to participate in their own victimization along with me and not tell what's really happening. I can make money for months and years that way. But if I actually snatch someone off the street or coming out of Rite Aid or whatever, people are looking for that person. So now I have a low opportunity to make money and I've taken a high risk. So it is exactly opposite of what the game is. Not saying it never happens. I'm just saying, look in the right places. If we really want to protect kids, our own children and other people's children, look in the right places. And I'm going to tell you what to look for. Some of the other myths are that human trafficking is always a violent crime. It can be emotionally violent, but it's not like always physically violent, always snatching, always abducting, always beating. All human trafficking involves sex trafficking. Human trafficking involves labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Traffickers target victims they don't know. Sometimes they do. And sometimes they target victims they do know. And sometimes all of these players kind of loosely, but you might not know what's been going on. You have to be moved from one state to another. You do not, even though it's trafficking kind of sounds like movement. You can live on your block, be trafficked on your block, and still be a victim of trafficking. You don't have to take people across state lines. And Toledo has a disproportionate sex trafficking problem. We do not. What we do have is people that are willing to speak out about it, people that are willing to come to the table to do something about it. And so that is a badge of honor for Toledo. We don't have any bigger problem than Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton, Chicago. Disproportionately, we do not. We have a problem proportionate to other cities. But what we do have is we have an FBI task force here that is working on the issue. We have a Lucas County Human Trafficking Coalition that comes together, all of us, to work on the issue. We have a Human Trafficking Institute at the University of Toledo. So we have a lot of people focused on this issue, and we put out a lot of information. And so that's why you might hear a lot about Toledo. So, Crystal, any further questions as of right now?
Yes, and thank you so much, Celia, for pausing to take these questions and make it so conversational. This is really, really great information. So one of the questions that has come in is, I know that there is a young adult being trafficked in the Las Vegas area, and they're from the Cleveland area. What can I do if they are not willing to get help?
Yeah, if they are over 18, then there's not much that you can do. But if they're under 18, then that is a child abuse issue. And you can contact the Child Welfare Agency in Las Vegas and in Lucas County and let them know what's happening. Whether that person is under 18 or over 18, I would still reach out to the national hotline, and I would explain, and Crystal put it in the chat. She mentioned it. I'm also going to mention it. But I would definitely call that 888 number. I would explain the situation and ask them to contact the Las Vegas task force. They have one there. I know they have one there. And give the name of the person if you know it. Give as much information as you can. You can even do it anonymously. They will still take your information seriously, and have them reach out to the task force. Or if you're really concerned, call the FBI, call Las Vegas police, find the task force number yourself, and reach out to them and tell them everything you know. And but I promise you, they will tell you absolutely nothing in return, because when somebody's working an active case or they are seriously considering opening a case, they won't share any information with anybody. But that's what you can do. There is a task force there. So yeah.
Thank you, Celia, for that information. At this time, we don't have.
Sorry, Crystal. I want to say one more thing. There's probably a street outreach program there too. So if you want to take the back channels and have somebody be looking around and let you know, kind of if they ran into them, they might be able to share. I'm not sure, but you want to look for an outreach program in Las Vegas. I know. Well, I can't recall it, but look for an outreach organization and maybe they can provide you information, or they can start looking and trying to get that person involved in some programming. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you for answering that. At this point, there are no other questions. So we can absolutely move forward.
Okay, awesome. So the second problem that we have is that people they tend to believe that anybody can be trafficked, and that is technically true. Like anybody can get struck by lightning as well, but it's problematic because it treats every person as an equal chance of getting trafficked. And we really need to be focused a lot on these populations that I presented earlier. Anybody can be trafficked, that is technically true. But according to the literature, according to what's happening in these communities, these are at least the young people that are at higher risk that we want to pay particular attention to. Now, there is some information that we have from 2006 to 2015. Yeah, 2015. The FBI task force got here in 2006. And that was because we had a big case in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where there were at least 20 kids that were being trafficked at a truck stop. The surprising thing was that really not too many people knew 20 kids were missing, okay? So that was a problem in and of itself. But we had a lot of kids missing. We went to Washington, D.C., we begged for a task force, we were allotted an FBI task force. That is what they do, 40 hours a week. It's amazing. We're the only city in Ohio to have such an FBI task force. And just from 2006 to 2015, they've convicted over 40 traffickers, rescued 120 kids themselves. We've helped many more kids than that, but they've done that themselves. And in 2016, we served 80 victims that year from Toledo, from the Toledo area. So just to give you kind of an idea and a flavor of what's happening in Toledo. And the FBI has done many more arrests since then. As you know, there were 3 pastors, Toledo and Detroit area pastors, that were convicted just a few years ago. So the consequences for victims is really they suffer a lot of physical and psychological abuse. They're much more likely to have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a lot of trauma going on. And so there's something called trauma bonding and Stockholm syndrome, where young people become very emotionally bonded to their trafficker. And it's a very common, it sounds a little weird, but it's a very common experience when someone's life is in danger, when they are operating on survival mode. And this person's voice is very powerful in their heart and in their mind. And so when someone wants to survive, psychologically, they connect with that person. They connect with their abuser, and they want their abuser to be happy. So the more happy and satisfying that trafficker feels, the more I get to keep breathing and eating and living. And so I began to become very loyal, very committed. And so when you see police bust in to rescue victims, you typically see victims that are not happy that this happened, because they believe their trafficker is all powerful and will find them wherever they go, or they think they're in love with their trafficker. So this is a very, very common experience. Like I sort of wish it were more of a snatch and a grab, because then you'd have a victim actively trying to get away. In these situations, victims are often loyal and committed to their trafficker, and sort of a brainwashing almost that happens. And it takes quite a while for them to realize that they don't have the freedom that they deserve, and they don't have the choices that they deserve to have in life to control their own lives. There are lots of health consequences, HIV, sexually transmitted infections, wounds, injuries, and things like that that kind of don't heal correctly. So there are lots of signs that people in, mental health, people in substance abuse, people in healthcare have been trained to look for in terms of victims. But when you're looking, whether it's you're driving the bus, whether you're in the community, whether it's in your family, context and proximity is important. So it depends on the context in which these things are happening. It depends on the proximity, how close you are to what's happening, so that you can clearly see or guess what might be happening. So we're looking for somebody who might be controlled by a trafficker. Maybe they're talking to you, but before they talk to you, they look at this person to see if they can even, speak about it. They don't consider themselves a victim. If you said you're a human trafficking victim, they probably wouldn't even know what human trafficking is. They've been trained often to tell lies, to not reveal the truth, to protect that trafficker and that industry. They often don't trust service providers, because either they've been customers, somebody's been customers in that same profession, or they think everybody's going to get arrested, and they aren't trusting of those service providers. You may see them hanging out with influential others that sell sex or buy sex, or is with some controlling person. Being a runaway, being homeless, you're very, very vulnerable in that situation. And of course, runaways ride the bus. Young people that are involved in drugs or alcohol, or older people involved in drugs or alcohol, heroin addiction, we have an epidemic, and there are ways that people will trade sex for drugs. Involvement with the juvenile justice or child welfare system, high risk factor, because that's already telling you that they've had some trouble in their life. Maybe they've been abused before. They've been victimized. They are very vulnerable to people on the street. Poor mental health, educational problems, gang affiliations, I talked about. Someone else holding their identification, particularly if they are from another country and they're here. Somebody holding their documents is going to be somebody in control. And then language and cultural barriers if they're from another country. By far, the most number of victims we find are domestic, they are citizens. But we also have victims from foreign countries that are working in all kinds of industries, ethnic industry, ethnic restaurants. We've seen people in hair braiding places in Columbus, seen people working on farms, egg farms, migrant camps, those types of things. So let's see. So victims experience trauma, which is deeply disturbing and distressing experience. There are 90 different signs of trauma: psychological, social, physical signs, health-related signs. Kids that are going off at you, screaming, yelling, being disruptive on the bus or whatever. Those could be kids that are acting out because of trauma, not because they're necessarily bad kids. There's complex and chronic trauma. And chronic trauma is just the same trauma happening over and over and over. When kids experience child abuse or neglect over and over and over, or sexual abuse. And then complex is when, a kid is sexually abused, then neglected, then trafficked. And so different types of trauma. And trauma, of course, affects every aspect of your life. So human trafficking is one of the human rights issues of our lifetime, because we want to help vulnerable people be able to live by choice and not by consequence. We want to make sure that we set them up on a good trajectory of their life and not ignore it and send them down a path where they're going to experience this kind of victimization and abuse. And so here's the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 888-373-7888 again. And if you suspect anybody might be involved as a victim of trafficking, or any young person under 18 involved in any form of the commercial sex trade, whether it's online, trading pictures, trading sex, any of those things, and maybe you're not even sure, but you suspect it, you can call this hotline anonymously, and they will take your information. And as soon as you hang up, they will call the FBI task force that we have here, and they will share all the information. I don't care if you don't know their names, you just know where they were, you know what they had on. My daughter did this when she worked at the mall at Forever 21. She saw a man come in with 4 teenage girls. The clothes he was buying them was not appropriate. The way he spoke to them, very sexually. She called the hotline and she said, look, this is what the guy looks like. These are what the kids look like. And you never know if there's a piece of the puzzle that you have that fits with other pieces of the puzzle that the task force has. So I would say make the mistake even and give a call, because, no harm, no foul. So we're very proud. The University of Toledo's Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute, very proud that TARTA has stepped up and has been doing it for several years very quietly as an excellent collaborator. I just want to say I'm a full tenured professor, so I don't have to say anything that I don't want to say. But I want to say that they have been a great friend to the Toledo community, and they've been a great partner and a wonderful collaborator. So, when you see the TARTA bus, they're not just driving up and down the street, but they are an embedded member of the community, and they are concerned about the issues and taking care of all the people that not only ride the bus, but are also living in the community. So other resources, if you want to know more, we have an Emancipation Nation podcast. Podcasts are free. If you don't know how to use podcasts, you can ask anybody, young people, they will hook you up and show you how to download and subscribe. And then you will receive the podcast to your phone or to your email every week, and you can learn lots of different topics. I interview lots of people around the world and across the nation and survivors. You can just learn so much more. The Emancipation Nation Network, you could get online, you can Google that, you can join a network of over 900 anti-trafficking advocates across the US and around the world and get lots of resources there. We have a Youth Pages Toledo, and that is our free app. We are updating it, so it will be available soon. But any teenager you know, or anybody, can download this free app onto your phone, and it will have all the resources that young people might need. Like, where do I get a pregnancy test? How do I know if I'm being abused or neglected? Or how do I do this? Or how do I go there? What times are they open? Who do I call? What's the phone number? It will have all that information so that young people don't have to walk around scared that they don't know what to do or who to call. It will be right there. We also have our International Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference, and that is a global conference. And you would be surprised to know that Toledo actually has the largest and oldest academic conference in the nation. And we host it every year. We have over 100 presenters that talk to you. This year, we're going to have actually Chris Hansen from The Catch a Predator. We're going to have Corey Feldman, who's going to come. We have some celebrity guests that are going to make appearances at the conference just because they care about the cause. I want you to know that all the proceeds from the conference go to support programming that we do right here in Toledo Research, and we give a little to our Human Trafficking Coalition in the community. So we're going to charge you money to come. So you should know that. The other ones are free that I talked about. This is going to cost you money, but know that the money you spend, we all volunteer so that we can take that money and we can use it to help support some of the causes that we have and some of the research that we're trying to do. So you feel good about spending that money. So this is the reason why we do what we do. And this is the reason why you were gracious enough to sit here and be on this call, and why we do the work we do. This is a visual timeline of the physical trauma that someone experiences when they're a victim of trafficking. So this is a little girl from the left to the right. This has been just her physical trauma. You can see it. I'm not even talking about her psychological or emotional or mental health trauma, which is vast, but this is just the physical. So one of the traffickers sort of summed up trafficking very well. And when he said, with the young girls, you promise them heaven. And that's exactly what a trafficker steps forward and says, I can do this for you, baby girl, I can do that. And then they follow you to hell, which is exactly what happens. So these are some of the victims, not our local victims, because we would not post pictures of our local victims. But this is something that has been in a book by Laura Coulter, who sort of, projected over time what happens to women and what happens to some of our young people that get involved. So I'm going to stop there and then take questions if we have any.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williamson, for that presentation. There was so much information that you've given us and the resources that you've provided to not only us, but the community. We can't thank you enough for that. And thank you so much for your partnership with our organization. I think that each and every person in our community acts as the eyes and ears. And that's how we work together to keep our community safe. And so at this time, what we're going to do is we will open up the Q&A. So if you have any questions for Dr. Williamson, you can submit them there. And we do have one that has come in. One of the questions is, has the Me Too movement improved human trafficking awareness and, more importantly, action on a more local level?
Yeah, well, first of all, the Me Too movement is awesome. And very much excited about that. And so, yeah, I think that it is informing human trafficking is informing the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter is involved. All of these things help elevate and enlighten the issues with vulnerable populations and with populations that have experienced oppression and discrimination. And so I think that they very much complement each other. In fact, at our conference coming up, we're attempting to recruit someone from who was a victim of Harvey Weinstein and also Jeffrey Epstein, because a lot of the Me Too movement helped to expose particularly Harvey Weinstein's work, and that really helped kick off a lot of the work that the Me Too movement is doing. So I think it's all complementary. You know, as we evolve as, you know, just members of society, we become more civilized as we evolve. So what we were willing to put up with yesterday, we are no longer willing to put up with today. And I couldn't be happier because I think the more that everyone gets opportunity, the more that we all can just breathe and feel a little bit better about people at the table along with us. Everybody should be at the table. It shouldn't be separated by your gender, your ethnicity, you know, your sexual orientation. So we're learning more and more as we become civilized that we all have something very valuable to offer.
Totally agree with that. Absolutely love that you, especially the part where you said everyone deserves a spot at the table. Mm-hmm. That really, really, I think that is so impactful. Another question that has come in is, what are some current things you are doing to heal the trauma of victims?
Yeah. Wow. Who asked that? Because that was a great softball question into what I want to say, which is we are starting a survivor's journey group. And it's for anyone really that has suffered either human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual abuse, sexual assault, child abuse. And it sort of takes people who have suffered trauma through violence through these journeys of healing and learning to trust again, learning to have support, learning to have healthy relationships, learning to feel joy again, not just always be hypervigilant and worried about your, you know, who might harm me, who's around me, but learning to actually experience joy again. Those are the things that we're developing this ongoing group. It'll be similar to AA in that you will work the journeys as you feel empowered to work the journey. So we have that going on. We have a free program which offers scholarships to survivors of human trafficking. We have 2 programs, Focus and Path. And Focus really works with teenagers, kids who are at high risk for trafficking. And if we discover that someone has been trafficked, whether it's an adult or a child, we refer them to our PATH program, which helps coordinate services to get you to an attorney, to get you to a mental health professional, to get you to substance abuse treatment if you need it, to walk hand in hand beside you toward your healing. So those are the things that the Coalition and the Institute collaborates to work together on. And, you know, we're always looking for more people to join our Lucas County Human Trafficking Coalition. So if someone is wanting to join, we would love to have you participate. If you have no time to join, that's okay. We have lots of programs locally and they need your help. So if you're too busy to give your time, checks are good. I'm not going to say write a check for our, but I'm going to say there are programs out there. Yeah. They're broke. If you want to knit things, crochet things, help serve in some capacity, all of those things would be wonderful.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that answer, Celia. And more information is available in some of those links that we've included in the chat. So the Lucas County Human Trafficking Coalition, their website is in the chat. If you want to click on that, learn more about that, and kind of what Celia was talking about with PATH, with the University of Toledo and the Social Justice Institute, that link is also in the chat if you would like to learn a little bit more about that. We do have a few more questions coming in. I do appreciate everyone being so engaged. These are really, really great questions, and awesome to hear Celia so authentically speak on these experiences and what she knows. So another question that came in is, at what age or how early should a parent begin talking about human trafficking with their child? And where are some resources to help them with that? That is a really, really great question.
Yeah, I think, it's never too soon. I mean, 3 years old, 5 years old, you can start talking about how precious your body is. And you can start talking about bad touches and good touches, and their bathing suit parts, and how you want to cover your bathing suit parts. And and they do some of these things in schools, but that your body is precious. And those types of conversations on until teenage years, when you start actually talking about, hey, if someone is touching you, or if you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to run and kiss Uncle Dave goodbye every time we leave. If you don't like kissing Uncle Dave, there's okay, no. Or you can go in your family and say, Uncle Dave, my kid's not kissing you. She don't feel comfortable with that. And that would be perfectly fine. Be a good advocate for your child. I always say, and there's a good website, polarisproject.org. I'll say it again, polarisproject.org. And they have good information. Also sharedhope.org, good information that just gives you printable lists and easy and videos and those types of things that you can share with young people. And I'll say that, this is the time, back in the day, we were our kids' like parent. Like, you do this, you don't do that. I've spoken, and then you walked away. So, and then there came a time where in the 70s, maybe you were your kid's friend, you're hanging out with your kid. And so people are sort of swinging back to, I'm not my kid's friend. But what I say is, in this day and age, you really have to be the hybrid. It's kind of like, you have to be the parent. You have to lay down the rules and you have to guide. But you also have to have a relationship enough that person can come to you and share risky information, embarrassing information. And you got to be a friend enough to be trusted in that way. Because if you are just a strict parent and I just lay down the law, guess what? You're going to know nothing about what's important. They're going to tell you everything that's BS, and they're going to tell you nothing about what's important, because they're online and you see their Instagram, but they got a Finstagram, which is a fake Instagram. So they're going to run circles around you technologically, because you will never be able to keep up technologically. And you can't stay up later than them. See, they can stay up later than you now. So they can get access to those phones. They can do all kinds of crazy things, but they don't know what they should and should not do, because they don't have the maturity. Their decision-making frontal cortex isn't even developed until 24 or 25 years old. So they need that person and not their friends, because their friends are the same age they are. I mean, same stupid mistakes, but they need someone who can guide them, that has the wisdom. That means you have to be parent enough to have the wisdom and the respect that you can guide, but be a friend enough where they will listen to you and they will share with you all the scary things that they wouldn't have otherwise told you, because you can't guide if you don't know. So you have to be the hybrid.
Great. Thank you so much. And we did put some of the Polaris Project and Shared Hope, those links in the chat for those who would like to look into that a little further. Some more questions coming in. There was a comment and question saying, I will be volunteering with Traffic Free prior to the Super Bowl to label soaps, which would be dropped off at the hotels and motels surrounding the stadium. However, yesterday I listened to a young girl who is a sex trafficking survivor who said that when she was taken to a motel, that her trafficker checked the bottom of the soaps and he was aware of labels being placed there. How can we keep steps ahead of the traffickers?
Yeah, it's like any business, right? Like, you're always trying to outmatch your competitor. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. And so I applaud you for doing, working on the SOAP campaign. You are getting involved, and that's exactly what we want. So I would say, please keep doing that, because that's so critical. And there has been victims that have been rescued because of the work that you and other people have been doing. So don't get discouraged and give that up. But there are always people every day. Microsoft has huge grants that they put out so that we can claim those grants and get all kinds of work done technologically, that we stay one step ahead. Laws are being passed so that people are held accountable. Now, people who actually get you hooked on drugs and traffic you will be facing even stiffer accountabilities. So throughout social services and mental health and substance abuse and policymaking and criminal justice, we are in technology. There are lots of people working on ways to stay one step ahead. And so we just have to keep our nose to the grindstone. I love that you're involved. You are along with me. When me and you, when our feet hit the floor in the morning, hey, they better watch out, because we're on our game. So hope you're on your game, because the day you're sleeping, I got you. So we will just keep on our grind, and we will just keep doing what we know we have to do for kids and people that are vulnerable.
Okay. Another question coming in is, the downtown library here in Toledo was once identified as a hub for human trafficking. Is that still the case?
No, because trafficking doesn't really have a place. It happens online, it happens everywhere, it happens at skating rinks, it happens at malls, it happens in very safe places where you think it wouldn't happen, right? Because that's why it's successful. The recruiters are very safe looking people, and the places of recruitment are very safe looking places. And that's why it happens. It's not going to happen in the back seedy alley or in the dirty bus station or, downtown Greyhound. It's not. It's going to happen in very safe places. It's going to happen in, when somebody's riding TARTA bus. And that's why actually TARTA's involved, so that their drivers can be the eyes and the ears and watch what's going on. And so we have trained the gas company before. We train the health department, food inspectors, people that you normally don't think about, but they're around and they're just looking. And so beauticians in Ohio have to have an hour of human trafficking. We're training people that traffickers might not even think about, but they're around. They come in your house, they drive by your house, they walk down your street. And so they're the people that are taking care of other people. So, yeah, it happens everywhere, and downtown's not a particular spot anymore, or might have never been, but it's just, it happens downtown and everywhere. Yeah, so good question.
Thank you, Celia, for answering that so eloquently again. So there are no other questions coming in. And since we are running right at that 1 o'clock hour, we are going to start to wrap up. But we want to thank you all again, to all of our meeting attendees, for joining us this afternoon, and especially our presenter, Dr. Celia Williamson, for presenting on such an important issue in our community and, like you said, in our lifetime. So we really do appreciate your time and the incredible work that you and your teams across Ohio are doing to keep us safe and help to better educate so that we can protect the people in our communities that we love most. So we do encourage you all to stay engaged with TARTA, the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at the University of Toledo, and the Lucas County Human Trafficking Coalition. As we had mentioned earlier in the presentation, all of those links are available in the chat. So I would encourage you to grab those, pop on over to them so that you can get a little bit more information. We also encourage you to mark your calendars for the International Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference. That will be taking place virtually from September 21st to the 23rd, as Celia said, of this year. Other than that, we really, like I said, appreciate your time, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you, everyone.